my predecessors, and then the 8 years that I was there, we sought out to answer every day was how do we achieve a flight safety with regards to the aircrew of less than 1%, really aiming for about 0.5% per year. And to answer that question and to achieve those outcomes, we found that when we had done our data, which was in-house studies, not randomized, not volunteered, we used what in the field of aerospace medicine is called high reliability data, where we can't study things like flight. And so out of the aerospace industry came the idea of high reliability data, where you make meticulous observations, you seek to eliminate bias, but you have to use what's there, and you have to launch your jet tomorrow and do the best that you can with the aircrew that you have. And so with that, we developed the coronary calcium as part of our risk predictor for events starting in 1982, and it has remained the single most useful piece of data that we collect on our aviators. But the option that we have that we don't have as primary care doctors or as cardiologists is we can set somebody out of duties. But remember, the question we were set out to answer was how do we achieve a safety record that is the best in the world? And so today, when you flew up here, Matt, you counted on that flight being safer than going into a hospital, right? That's high reliability data. That's the data that we have with the calcium scoring. And even though that's been published in the medical literature, it probably didn't make it into your review because of the different questions we were answering and the different research techniques we used.
Well, Joe, I think you need to publish more on that, because I don't
feel
even know all of that data. I know you've been doing it for a long
published,
time.
yeah,
but
we've published it, yeah.
I don't think it's
I would just
public
say,
enough.
it's kind of off topic. I'm on a National Academy panel looking at public health emergency preparedness. We don't have randomized trials, and so we had folks from the National Transportation Safety Board come in to tell us how they figured out what happens when a plane crashes.
Exactly.
But just to say, I mean, that's really why all of us are here, to talk about how do we drive the field forward, what are the right questions, and how do we produce high quality evidence, whether it's randomized or not, that the U.S. Preventive Task Force and others can look at. And I think it's great to hear what direction we're going, and also to think about in our Silicon Valley, what are we going to do, what are we going to take away from this to make change and get to zero. So, sorry,
This is just a quick, and it's not a scientific comment, but the comment is that it's really confusing to the public when you get different recommendations from the Heart Association and a lot of other groups and the U.S. Preventive Task Force. And, you know, it's clear from the discussion today that you were assessing not the question that the Heart Association was assessing, and the recommendations coming out of it are totally different. But try to tell that to the public now, I think it's extraordinarily confusing.
I agree.
okay.
Thank you very much. And as I would say, on behalf of the task force, I will say thank you to Matt and colleagues, because we're the consumers of your studies, and we would be nowhere without your work. So thank you very much.
Your name,
Yeah, so I'm Alan Glasseroff. I'm a retired clinician at Stanford. I'm the primary care doctor in the room, unless I'm mistaken.
He's the Uber.
And I'm also a person whose career, the latter part of my career was spent taking care of people with multiple comorbidities and very high risk, high cost populations. And there are two things that I take from this, you know, trying to tie it back to stories we heard at the beginning, because I think those are heartfelt, and I really want to thank the people that shared them with us. It's not at all clear that what we've learned today would have prevented the disasters in your life, because let's say the recommendation, you get a score of 8,000, you know, probably people are going to check you out right away. But if you don't get a score of 8,000 but above 100, you're going to be put on treatment that often is overused.
Statins?
Yeah, right. And you still could drop dead from a heart attack tomorrow, right? So if you have a critical lesion that isn't discovered by that method. So I just want to say that. But the thing that I really want to talk about is sort of the data that I think needs to be reproduced in other settings. So my whole career was sort of working on changing patient behavior around self-management. That's what I do. We were incredibly successful here doing that. And what I've never seen work for any other disease state for a long time is fear. So maybe there's something different about seeing calcium in your coronary artery that gives you the 5-year dose or the 10-year dose of adherence to treatment. But I would want that found more than once.
Yeah, so every study in cardiology demonstrates that when you can show the patient that they have a disease, they become more compliant.
For a while.
But every study, it's uniform. So fear in cardiology always works.
Well, no. What I see are the patients who don't go back to you.
I'm not
And what
saying-
I see are the people who have heart attacks and they smoke and they're lying in the unit and they're saying, I'll do anything, Lord, to get me out of here. I'll even stop smoking. And then I see them smoking again years later. So it's
But I'm saying, but that goes back, well before coronary calcium. The cardiac cath data shows that when we show people that they have coronary disease, they become more compliant. It's not in 100% of patients, and we've all seen those pictures of people with the trach and smoking through the trach. But those are the crazy negative anecdotes that are just as misguided as the opposite. I just don't.
Well,
think
they're the
you wanna-
5% or cost 50% of the money in the country. So
But-
maybe I'm dealing with
But
it.
I'd still much rather play to the 95%, understanding that we're not gonna get to 100, than be afraid to do it because of 5%, that's all. I'm going for 95.
Well, I'm just calling for more
Of
study.
course, no, and I
So
appreciate
Joe's guy, the Air Force guy, and then Victoria's.
Got the right last name. I would like to modify Matt's statement just a tiny bit, which I hopefully not insult you, is that fear in cardiology always works. Perhaps you're forgetting it takes 2 heart attacks or 3 heart attacks.
Sorry. So what percent of heart attacks, though, do people not have the option to?
Well, Dr. Budoff covered that very well. It's 2/3 don't make it.
Every time.
Well, don't even make it to the cath lab, and then the outcome as far as death is, it's estimated around 50%. That number, has fluctuated some. But, to answer your question about whether or not we're going to be successful or whether someone's not going to change, this is something we all struggle with. And I think I'll use a story to tell everyone here what changed my mind on when I give every single patient a chance to see data, even if it's controversial and even if we don't know what to do with it, is I had a patient who had a heart attack who had not been given the chance to make any changes. And they thankfully had not seen me or one of my colleagues, but they'd seen another group. And they kept asking the question, why didn't I get the chance to make a decision myself, right? That's a rare patient that wants to be that involved in their health care. But I treat every patient as if they need that autonomy to make their own decision. And I think patients handle controversial data just fine. They understand that the world is complex. But if we don't give them that chance, then that's on us. And I've made a commitment to myself. I don't ever want to be in that position where one of my patients didn't have a chance to make their own decision, even if the data is complex and I don't know the right answer to tell them.
All right, so I'm going to totally piggyback on Joe, and I'm not speaking in the community and the public all the time. Matter of fact, I had a presentation last night with the National Charity League. I had about 65 women, and every single one of those women was very appreciative just to even know about calcium scoring. And that was why I started No More Broken Hearts, because we didn't even know. We didn't even have a choice. And yes, my husband probably, he could have still died. But we didn't even have the choice that if we found plaque, to manage it, to care for it, and maybe he could be here today. And so I agree with Joe. I think that when you really get into the public a lot, they don't think that way. They really don't. When you see calcium score, it would be like a woman, seeing that she's got a little bit of cancer from her mammogram. Oh, I don't need to do anything about it. Nobody's going to do that. They see they have heart disease, they know it's disease, they know. And you know what? There will be some that don't, and that's their choice.
It's probably 50%.
That is And that's okay, but what about those 50% that still get to have a choice in life?
No, I'm
Yeah.
not deciding about the evidence.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about, we seem to tie issues together that's far-ranging. And I think the one question is it, are the intermediate group an appropriate group of screening? I think it's a worthwhile discussion. And the evidence seems strong as presented. The other one is tying it to the anecdotes, which are heartbreaking, but are complicated in the light of the other story.
Well, let me, we want to get to Scott and the pair perspective, but just to maybe summarize a little bit, I think we've really surfaced here an underlying very important issue, Joe, your comment, and Hay as well, and that, you know, really, how do you take this information, the advance of science that we're now hearing about, et cetera, into the doctor-patient relationship and the ecosystem, if you will, that surrounds that doctor-patient relationship, like complex organizations, like medical schools that you try to provide care for, right? And so I think a lot of this is around that shared decision-making with the patient. What information is the primary care physician or the cardiologist or the whole referral going to share with that patient? How do you adapt and tailor it? Because not everyone is in the military, not everyone has, you know, PhDs or even a high school education. And how do you take that into account to still empower that patient and their family? Ultimately, it's their decision, the uncertainty. So what is going to motivate me, for example, not about, I'm convinced that, you know, once you see that, all that plaque, except for calcium, you know, you're going to be pretty goddamn motivated, whether it's fear or something. So what's going to motivate me to even begin to ask Dr. Rudolph when I go in to see him, you know, what my risk factor is for heart disease? He's telling me you can't really depend too much on that calculator, but on the other hand, can you tell me, Steve, a little bit about your family history? Well, as I listen to your family history, you know, a lot died from heart disease. So let me share with you a little bit of some of the data we have, that in that subgroup, you have a family history, and you might want to consider this calcium score, getting it. Here are the pros and cons. So patients are sensitive to their family history. They know that. They may not know a lot about it. So, but my point is really about empowering the patient or family to share decision making with this new evidence that's, you know, coming to the fore. Maybe we can come back to that. But that's one of the things I think we're surfacing here. But in any event, the payer. When are you going to start covering this, Scott?
I was just gonna say, you know, before we
Not
can
to
get
put
to
you on the
the
spot.
I think it's off. I was just gonna say, before we can even get to the patient, you know, I'm a stroke neurologist. I think that there's a lot of, you know, important information here that we don't even know about in stroke neurology that I'm gonna take back to my group. But the first thing all of us are gonna ask is, well, if I order that scan in my patients that have supposedly no heart disease but have come to me with a cryptogenic stroke, you know, is the insurance gonna cover it? So,
There you go.
yeah.
Dr. Barron and
Before-
then to
just
Scott.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, just one other comment before we hear what you're going to say, and it has to do with healthcare disparity. Because, you know, $100, $150 doesn't sound like a lot of money to the people in this room. But there is a big distinction between who can pay out of pocket and who cannot. And it creates a disparity in who gets the benefit from having this test and who doesn't.
There's already a disparity in the
And that's,
outcomes.
yeah, there's huge disparity in outcomes, and that's one of the things we really focused on down in San Diego. And that's a huge opportunity for everyone, not just the health insurance industry. And that's actually something we're looking at as an organization internally, is how do we attack those healthcare disparities? You know, what's the government role, what's the health plan role, what's the public sector role, president, et cetera. So just to shed a little light on how we actually look at whether or not we're gonna cover something, I don't know how many of you have ever served on a policy committee like that looks at this, but I'll just shed a little light on how we do it. The first thing we look at is medical necessity. Is something medically necessary to cover? And whenever we do that, we look at all the evidence available, much like you were doing on the USPTF. And of course, the preponderance of data, we'd love to all have randomized controlled trials, right, to show that there's something out there. We also look at guidelines, recommendations, key knowledge leaders in those certain fields.
And when we look at all the preponderance of evidence, we find out, yes, there's something that the science is good enough that, yes, it says it should be covered. You brought up a great point is there a subset of patients here where this really may benefit? And when you looked at the AHA guidelines, it really seemed to hone in on that intermediate risk group, and it said may benefit in that risk discussion you have with your patient. So when we look at this, and since these are brand new guidelines, we obviously have not looked at this yet as a medical policy. That is a very interesting discussion, and we're going to do a deep dive when we do look at this in our Med Policy Committee to look at that evidence. So the next thing you do is, okay, yeah, it's probably medically necessary for some patients, and then you have to figure out, so how am I going to write those guidelines so I'll cover it for those patients it's medically appropriate for, but not for everyone else? Because what's the danger when you start covering something and it's appropriate for the intermediate risk group, and then everyone else is already on 18-year-olds, right? Is that the appropriate population doing? So how do you write that? And then if you're gonna write that, then how do you review it and govern